So everybody knows at this point that the Las Vegas Raiders officially struck out on Matthew Stafford, who ended up choosing to go back to the Los Angeles Rams. But what people don't realize is the Raiders are not done at this point. They're going to continue to go forward. They're going to try to figure out who their quarterback is as they continue to go forward. And at some point, the Raiders are going to land some quarterback that's not in the building right now. Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew will not be the Raiders quarterbacks as we go forward. And I think that's kind of been proven. The fact that the Raiders were fully invested in a guy like Matthew Stafford. Well, now we got another report that's coming out that the Raiders, who missed out on Matthew Stafford, have shifted focus. This comes from Tony Pelini. This guy's putting it out there that basically the Raiders are all in on Sam Darnold. Specifically, he's saying that people close to Sam Darnold have told him that the Raiders coach Pete Carroll will work to make a move to acquire the quarterback from the Vikings. So think about the report that's coming out, right? Tony Pelini is saying that he knows people that are close to Sam Darnold, which probably means it's Sam Darnold's agent, right? Let's just be 100% honest. This is how the news kind of works. Agents tell these insiders reports. They tell these guys to put these things out. Vice versa, these guys ask for inside information into some of these clients, and for that, they'll kind of put these reports out there. Ian Rappaport does it, Adam Schefter does it, Tony Pelini, who is a solid NFL insider, also does it. And he's saying that someone he knows close to Sam Darnold is telling him that Pete Carroll is the guy that's going to make that move to acquire the Viking quarterback. And I want to talk about this report. I totally understand some people are going to push back a little bit, right? Some people are to say, hey, I'll believe it once it actually happens, right? I'm not going to fall for this again, right? Because this will technically now be the third thing that the Raiders have, the Raiders might make this really, really awesome move to those two guys are kind of gone, right? We had it happen with Ben Johnson when the Raiders were apparently all in on Ben Johnson, right? Tom Brady met with him, and we were at some point the leaders for Ben Johnson, right? At least according to the media. And then it happened with Matthew Stafford recently as well. Right, the Raiders were apparently interested. Tom Brady met with Matthew Stafford. It was either going to be Matthew Stafford to the Raiders, who apparently agreed to a contract with him, or, if that didn't work out, then Matthew Stafford, of course, will be back with the Rams. The Raiders obviously made an offer. In fact, we even got a report on that offer. The Raiders were willing to pay Matthew Stafford up to $100 million on a 2-year contract. So the Raiders apparently made Matthew Stafford an offer. It was a 2-year contract between 90 to 100 million, right? So 90 million would have probably been the low end of it, up to 100 million. And I say that because if the Raiders truly were all in on a guy like Matthew Stafford, right? If they made this offer, and keep in mind, the reports out there, and they're legit reports, that Matthew Stafford actually did agree with the Raiders that, hey, I'm cool with that contract, right? And we'll see at this point if the Rams match it. If they don't, then we'll go ahead and move forward, and ultimately the Raiders can trade for Matthew Stafford at that point. But of course, the Rams matched that offer, right? They went ahead and said, hey, we'll give you something similar to that. But the fact that the Raiders made a contract offer to Matthew Stafford, why would they not take that same money and now give it to Sam Darnold, right? If Pete Carroll wants to win a Super Bowl, he understands how important the quarterback position is. And we've already went all in on Sam Darnold, or on Matthew Stafford. To me, this report's a legit report, right? I think the Raiders are going to be all in for Sam Darnold. Now, will it actually happen, right? And that's going to be the question mark as we kind of go forward. Just taking a step back, one of the things we have to realize is just because the Raiders were not able to bring in Ben Johnson, just because the Raiders were not able to bring in Matthew Stafford, they still tried, right? It's not like the Raiders did not try. And it's not like we heard these reports where there was nothing else on the other side of it. We know for a fact Tom Brady met with Ben Johnson via Zoom. We know for a fact Matthew Stafford and Tom Brady met in Montana. We know for a fact those two things happened. So the Raiders were actually interested, and they actually were trying to acquire those two guys. It's completely different if it's a report and there's no basis to that report. We're hearing that the Raiders are trying to make moves to actually get better. And I want you guys to think about this for a second. In the last 20 years, how many times can you guys recall that the Raiders made moves that actually made sense, right? The last move that made sense, that I would say actually made sense for the Raiders, was when we hired John Gruden, right? I thought it was a great hire. I thought he was a good offensive-minded coach. Him with Derek Carr should have been able to get Derek Carr kind of back on track and get us into playoff contention. I think it was a good move, right? I think we were kind of getting up to that point. We had kind of started a rebuild as well. But the fact that the Raiders front office, right? The fact that the Raiders coaching staff, they're, trying to get Ben Johnson, the next great head coach. They're trying to get Matthew Stafford, a guy that could actually get us into the playoffs. The fact the Raiders' current staff is actually trying to make these decisions tells me that this staff knows what they're doing. They're trying to actually win football games. And I think for the Raiders trying to win games, I think Sam Darnold definitely gives you that opportunity to win games as well. I never overlook the fact that, you bring in a guy like Sam Darnold, you're upgrading at the quarterback position, right? And I don't think it's a small upgrade. I think it's a massive upgrade. Sam Darnold can create with his legs. Sam Darnold can play within structure. And I think when you give Sam Darnold a good offensive coordinator, which, I think this past season and even the year before with the Niners, he's had 2 good offensive coordinators. I think you put Chip Kelly and Sam Darnold together, and I think good things are going to happen for the Raiders. We would obviously have to clean some things up and fix some things, but I think the Raiders can actually win football games with Sam Darnold as their quarterback. And if you're willing to give Matthew Stafford, who's 37 years old, basically $50 million over 2 years, why not give that type of contract to Sam Darnold? Now, I would hope that Sam Darnold would be a little bit cheaper, closer to $40 million. Not 100% sure if that's going to happen. I could see Sam Darnold actually taking a contract like that, right? Like, right now, how many teams are actually out there that are looking for quarterbacks? You can say the Titans, Giants, Raiders are probably the 3 teams that could actually make contract offers to Sam Darnold, but we have to realize the Titans have the number 1 overall pick, so it doesn't make sense for them to buy Sam Darnold, right? So really, the only 2 teams that are actually interested would be the Giants and Raiders, and we've already heard the Giants are kind of all in on Aaron Rodgers, so it's really only the Raiders, right? So Sam Darnold doesn't have a huge market out there for him right now. And I think for the Raiders, if you're the only team that's willing to take Sam Darnold and pay him that type of money, maybe he'll take like $40 million or maybe closer to 35 or somewhere in between that, right? Maybe it's a 2 or 3 year contract and Sam Darnold can kind of prove himself. And then at 30 years old, if he proves himself, he can sign that $50 million plus per year contract, right? To me, if I'm the Las Vegas Raiders, I am legitly bringing in Sam Darnold if you can. I know some people are going to push back against that, but remember, good quarterbacks help win football games, especially when you pair them up with good offensive coordinators, a good coaching staff. The Raiders have that right now. And never overlook the fact that Pete Carroll's done this with multiple quarterbacks where they've had success. Chip Kelly's been in multiple different schemes. He's seen multiple different things that work, things that don't work. And I think for the Raiders, you're also kind of at that point where, you can decide to say, hey, let's just wait until the draft. Cam Ward's going to be the number 1 overall pick. If you guys have not heard the reports, let's just go ahead and shift into this a little bit. There's been multiple people that have been at the NFL Combine that have said they've spoken to multiple front office, multiple scouts, and a lot of people at this point have basically put the same report out there that Kurt's putting out there. Kurt said after he left the Combine, it is clear that every NFL team now has Cam Ward as QB1, and it's not close. The new battle is who is QB2 between Jackson Dart and Shedeur Sanders. So Kurt is saying something that I've seen maybe 2 or 3 other people kind of repeat the same thing, right? Where these people are basically saying that Shedeur Sanders is not QB1. Is not close, right? Kurt's not the only one that kind of has put this out there. If you're the Raiders and you're saying, hey, let's not target Sam Darnold. Instead, let's go all in on Shedeur, or maybe it's Jackson Dart, and you're going to say, hey, let's draft him with the 6th overall pick. The issue with that is you're not getting better as a football team, right? You're not using that 6th overall pick to actually improve the roster. You're using it on a pick, which we don't really know if it's going to ever pan out. That too, if you go in with Shedeur or even Jackson Dart, right, if that's who you choose. If you go in with one of these quarterbacks, the thing that's going to end up happening is you're going to bring them in. You're not really getting better because you're not going to get that player at pick 6. But then what's going to happen is if the quarterback does not perform in his rookie year, you're going to say, all right, no worries, let's give him a second year. Let's see if he can do it in year 2. And if he struggles again, you're going to say, all right, final year 3, let's see if he has any sort of game. This is the final year. And by then, Pete Carroll's getting ready to retire. Patrick Graham and Chip Kelly have taken coaching jobs somewhere else, right? And I don't want to overlook this fact. The Raiders coaching staff is legit this year. This is the best coaching staff we've had in a really, really long time. So don't overlook that fact right there. If you're the Raiders, would you rather go in with a rookie quarterback and hope it works out, or would you rather get a veteran that's ready to compete as soon as the 2025 NFL season? So to me, if you're the Las Vegas Raiders, between a rookie, between a veteran, you should go that veteran route because you'll be a lot better in the short term and you can actually compete for a Super Bowl in the next 3 to 4 years, right? While Pete Carroll and this coaching staff is still here. Never overlook, you look at Kyle Shanahan, he had a lot of success with Robert Saleh when he was the defensive coordinator. They're like one of the best teams in the NFL, offense, defense, dominant. Went to the Super Bowl, did not win. Made some moves. Robert Saleh kind of left, and it just hasn't really been the same for the Niners. And this past season, they had a really, really bad defensive coordinator. They really did not win a whole lot this year, right? And their defense was a big factor to that. And again, it's just the coaching staff, right? It really does matter. But I also do want to just kind of touch in a little bit on these quarterbacks. You know, we're hearing now that Cam Ward is the QB1, but you guys know I have been saying this for months. I had heard this months back from legit scouts in the NFL, right? I have a couple of friends that I've kind of worked with at the Hula Boy, and even prior to that, right, they're guys that I had known. Maybe they're in college, or maybe they're working at like, you know, the Athletic or whatever it was. Not exactly the Athletic, but and then they kind of, you know, went through the steps and they eventually landed a legit position, right? Rather as the NFL. Some guys are still in college, working for college teams specifically. But I've known, right, that Cam Ward is by far the best quarterback in this class. And I still thought Shedeur Sanders was too. I don't know if I would say Jackson Dart is ahead of Shedeur, to be honest with you guys. I still think Shedeur's the quarterback 2 in this class. But I also don't think it's close, right? Like you go back in the last couple of years, right? Like Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, this is neck and neck, right? You go even the year before that, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud's neck and neck, right? This year, I don't think it's neck and neck. I think what's going to end up happening is Cam Ward's going to go 1, and I don't know if we're going to get another quarterback in the first round. Because of the fact that there's quarterbacks available, because of the fact that this class has some good, talented players, right? Like, you can get guys like Anthony Belton, you can get guys like Travis Hunter, Emeka Ibuka, and we've even seen some other guys, right? Matthew Golden ran a 4.29 40-yard dash yesterday, and no one expected that out of him. Now, we know that guy was talented, right? His tape is out there. He was already a top 4 wide receiver coming in. He might be the best wide receiver, right? Like, even if Travis Hunter is off the board, there's a chance Matthew Golden goes top 15, right? That doesn't include Tetro McMillan out of Arizona. That doesn't include Luther Burden. That doesn't include Emeka Ibuka. Like, there's a chance we get 5 or 6 wide receivers in the first round, right? So there's talent to be had, and when you have the 6th overall pick, you might get Abdul Carter, you might get Travis Hunter, right? I think for the Raiders, you got to kind of go all in to really improve this roster, and if you get a veteran quarterback, that player you draft with pick 6, paired up with that veteran quarterback, will make it a lot easier for the Raiders to actually find success long-term. Plus, this draft class is a little unique in the aspect that there's a lot of offensive linemen that are tackles in college right now. They'll end up playing guard in the NFL, and we're going to go ahead and pivot into that at this point. So, this morning, the NFL Combine, the final day of the Combine, they are doing the offensive line measurements, right? So, we're getting official numbers for offensive linemen. Remember, there's a couple of things to look at when it comes to offensive linemen and the measurements. Now, before we go forward, I want to just take a second to give a big shout out to the sponsor of this channel, because this content would not be possible without Underdog. If you guys have never utilized Underdog before, trust me, man, you guys are missing out. I don't do traditional fantasy sports that often. I did do one league this year, but generally speaking, I'm not really doing it anymore. And that's mostly because of Underdog. Underdog has this game that I really, really enjoy. It's called Pick'em. Essentially, you're going to go out there and just make picks that you think are going to be right. They'll have pretty much every pick you can think of for every player, and they have multiple categories as well. So an example would be, you know, I think Aiden O'Connell is going to throw for 125 yards. And you're essentially just going to pick higher on that, right? I think he'll have more than 125 yards. You might say, hey, Dak Prescott's going to have at least 2 touchdowns. I'll pick higher on that. You might say Caleb Williams is going to have a rushing touchdown. And some of those stats also give you multipliers, right? So usually for quarterbacks rushing it in, right? That's something most quarterbacks aren't doing every single week. You'll get like a 4x multiplier on that. So depending on the multiplier, depending on how many picks, you know, you can turn $5 into $400, $1,000, right? Whatever it ends up being. Obviously, it depends on the multiplier, but you know, Underdog to me is one of those places that I pretty much do every single week at this point. Very fun. It makes like watching the Jets and the Dolphins without Tua makes them interesting, right? So check out Underdog. If you guys have never used them before, it is the best place. Trust me when I say that. Go to underdogfantasy.com, use my promo code that you guys see on the screen, or use the app. I recommend the app. So let's get right back into the content. Remember, there's a couple of things to look at when it comes to offensive linemen and the measurements, and we're going to go through a lot of these different guys. By far, the biggest factor if you can play offensive tackle is going to be your arm length. Your height does not matter. It's all about the arm length. How far can you reach outwards? Because when you got a defensive end coming towards you and you need to anchor down, you know, when you need to recover when a guy hits you with an inside move, the arm length is what's going to catch those guys. It's what's going to stop those guys. Height doesn't really matter. You can be 6'7", you can be 6'4". Your arm length matters a lot more. And of course, footwork will probably be the second thing, right? Can you move well? If you can't, you're going to fall. If you're a good mover, you'll go a little bit higher, right? So we got some combine measurements. There's some guys that I think have kind of skyrocketed at this point. You know, Kelvin Banks Jr. early on, everybody was like, this is the best offensive tackle coming out. He was listed at 6'4" at Texas, and people were like, he's probably 6'3". He looks kind of small. He measured in at 6'5" height-wise. Arm length, 33.5, I think is okay, right? I think, you know, 34 would be ideal for an offensive tackle. I think if you're in the 33s, you'll be okay. Anything less than 33 is an absolute no, right? And even 33, you're still kind of like, you know, you're not 100% sure. He measured at 33.5. He is 6'5", 33.5. I think Kelvin Banks skyrockets a little bit because people did think he was going to be small and he'd have short arms, so he'd probably project to a guard at the next level. With this, I think he'll end up being a first-round pick. I think we're going to get 6 or 7 offensive tackles get drafted in the first round. I think 2 or 3 will have success, while all the other guys end up being guards, right, at some point in their careers. I think teams will draft them to play tackle, and they'll end up being guards. Calvin Banks, pretty solid arm length number. Will Campbell, I think, takes a big hit. Not that I'm surprised. I've talked about Will Campbell multiple times as well. If you guys follow me on this channel, you guys know that I've said this multiple times. Will Campbell's arm lengths are not ideal, right? I have access to Bledsoe, which is a scouting company that the NFL uses, and Bledsoe does pro day measures of every player that wants to kind of do it, and especially with guys that are projected to be drafted, they take their measurements the year before they come out. So Will Campbell last year at LSU's pro day basically got measured, and the arm length, I think it was actually 32.5. This one's 32 5/8, so he grew a little bit, right? But it's about the same, right? It's 1/8 inch of a difference, right? So Will Campbell, to me, takes a huge hit. I think he's going to be a guard at the next level. I would be shocked if anybody takes this guy in the top 15. His tape's good, right? It's really good, but the arm length's going to be a huge concern. I think he projects as a guard. I think most teams will project him as a guard. Although he did actually come out in the combine interview process, and he actually did say that NFL teams have told him they'll draft him as a tackle if they draft him, right? Or they'll value him as an offensive tackle. I don't think that makes sense. You know, I'm not spending the 6th overall pick on a guard. That doesn't make sense. And that arm length, right? If you guys go in and research every starting offensive tackle, we use like mockdrafttable.com, I think is the website. If you guys go to that website and you guys search every starting tackle's arm length, you won't find anyone with 32-inch arm length. Josh Simmons, another guy. People are like, hey, this guy might be the best tackle. His tape does check out, but the measurements don't. 6'4" and 7/8 of an inch is his height, right? 6'4" and 7/8. To me, he's almost 6'5", so the height isn't really a concern. The arm length is a concern. 33-inch arms, that's a huge concern. I think he's going to end up falling at this point as well. But I think he's still a good offensive tackle, tape-wise. Still has shown, you know, the movement skills. And this is one of the things that I've been saying with this tackle class, right? There's a lot of offensive tackles that are coming out this year that are going to end up being guards. And that's not a bad thing, right? You look at like Zach Martin, you look at Tyler Smith, Brandon Sheriff, right? I think he's the Jags at this point, or although he might not be with them anymore. But you look at some of these guards in the NFL, right? Guys that play tackle, that move to guard, and they're some of the best guards in the NFL, right? These are like the dominant guards. And there's so many examples of these guys, right? Just around the NFL. Peter Skronsky, Matthew Bergeron, right? They're guys that were tackles that convert to guard because of the short arms, and they end up becoming really, really good guards. In fact, some of these guys are the best guards in the NFL, right? Not saying Josh Simmons won't be a tackle. I think he probably still will have that opportunity as a tackle, and he might still be the first tackle taken. You got Armand Membao out of Missouri. Love this guy's tape. He has the best tape in this class. He actually did measure in with half-inch shorter arms, which is kind of interesting, at the draft than at the Senior Bowl. At the Senior Bowl, he got measured in at 34-inch arms. I'm not sure if the Senior Bowl does this stuff on purpose, but the Senior Bowl had a lot of these guys with longer arms than where they got measured at the Combine. The Combine is the official number, right? So Membao is 6'4" and 2/8 of an inch, or 1/4 of an inch. He weighs 332 pounds, 33.5-inch arms. The arms are okay for me, same with the height, right? We always knew this guy was on the smaller side. I think he might be the first tackle taken. I think there's a real chance Armand Membao will be the first tackle taken in this class. Would I be happy if the Raiders took him with the 6th overall pick? I'd be okay with it, right? I wouldn't love the pick, right? I don't think the Raiders need to get a right tackle. I'd give DJ Glaze one more opportunity. But I also wouldn't be mad, right? If John Spytek said Armand Membao is going to be a Pro Bowl tackle, the fact that they already drafted Tristan Wirfs, and he's kind of went down that path. I would not mind if he felt this guy's, the future right tackle. In fact, the Raiders got to shore that right tackle position up, especially if we're bringing a quarterback. And if we do draft the right tackle, DJ Glaze bumps inside. And I think Glaze will be a really good, really good guard. Again, tackle in college, guard in the NFL. Those guys always work out. So I'd be okay with that as well. Just a couple of the guys that I want to kind of get into. Charles Grant is another guy. This guy has some of the best tape that you'll see in college. Now, he was at William & Mary, so it does make it a little bit easier, right? Imagine putting a guy like Will Campbell in at William & Mary, right? He'd have a really good, tape, obviously. But regardless of him dominating at William & Mary, Tyler Smith, right? Best guard in the NFL right now, left guard, Dallas Cowboys. He was also at Tulsa, so he didn't play a lot of really good competition, and he dominated at Tulsa. Similar to a Charles Grant, and even the guy here, Anthony Belton. Anthony Belton, Charles Grant, Tyler Smith, these guys legitly were physically dominant. It was similar to what we saw with Jackson Powers Johnson, where these guys would grab people and just toss people out of there, right? They would basically physically beat the crap out of people, right? And Charles Grant did that at William & Mary. Anthony Belton did it at NC State. Tyler Smith obviously did it as well at Tulsa. And then Jackson Powers Johnson did that at Oregon. And Tyler Smith's the best guard in the NFL right now, in my opinion. And Jackson Powers Johnson is probably going to be the best center in the NFL this season. To me, these two guys are going to be really good players at the NFL, in the NFL as well. It'll be interesting to see, though, because Charles Grant does play left tackle right now at William & Mary. Will he stay as a tackle in the NFL? I think measurement-wise, it really checks out. He's 6'4" and 7/8 of an inch, so he's very close to being 6'5". And then the arm length is absolutely phenomenal. 34 and 1/4 inch arms. That's exactly what you need right there. I think he's going to be drafted probably in the first round. It's unfortunate because he was a guy that if he actually was healthy and was able to play at the Senior Bowl, he did accept the invite, by the way. But if he was able to be healthy and play, I think his draft stock would have skyrocketed. I think people would have said he's the best tackle in, coming out, depending on if he had a good Senior Bowl week, right? We kind of saw guys like Darnold Wright go to the Senior Bowl, and we weren't 100% certain. Tape looked really good, but he went to the Senior Bowl and dominated, and he was a top 10 pick because of that. I think Charles Grant could have had that type of Senior Bowl as well. And I think Anthony Belton, right underneath him, did have that type of Senior Bowl. I would not be surprised to see Anthony Belton be the first tackle taken. Now, I still do have concerns if he can be a tackle in the NFL. To be honest, the difference between Anthony Belton and Charles Grant is Charles Grant's a lot faster. He's a lot more explosive. He moves a lot better. Anthony Belton still moves really well. He's 6'6", 336 pounds. That's humongous, right? I want you guys to think about this. There is an absolute massive difference if you're 336 pounds versus 315 pounds. This is a huge difference. I know people are going to say it's only 20 pounds, right? If you're 220 and you're 200, that might not be a big difference. But when you're 336 pounds, think about how massive you are. 6'6", 336 pounds. 20 pounds at 336 is a massive difference. This guy's one of the biggest guys coming out. He's one of the strongest guys coming out. He's a left tackle at NC State. He has dominant tape. I think if he plays guard, if a team drafts him, I think he's going to get drafted in the top 20 picks. I'd be surprised if he doesn't. I'd be shocked if he's not a first-round pick. I think if he gets drafted by a team, like if no team values him as a tackle, right? If people say, hey, we're kind of hesitant with the movement, and if no one drafts Anthony Belton to play tackle, I think he'd still be drafted between the 20, similar to the way Tyler Smith was to play guard. I think he's going to become one of the best guards within the first 2 years, right? It's similar to the way with Jackson Powers Johnson. You just kind of knew based off his college tape that this guy's going to be a really good football player. And Jackson Powers Johnson came in year one, and he had absolute dominant reps against some of the best defensive linemen in the NFL, right? Powers Johnson, and although he was moving from center to guard and kind of going back and forth, there was no consistency. The guy was dominant, right? And I think Anthony Belton's going to kind of have that same upside. He might not work out as an offensive tackle, but I think as soon as he starts to play guard, and he might work out as a tackle, who knows? But as soon as he starts playing guard, I think he's going to be one of the best guards. Right? He's definitely one of my guys. We'll see how that kind of ends up happening. Tyler Booker actually had really good measurements as well. 6'4", 5'8", 34.5. Some people say he's the best guard coming out. I would still argue, although he has really good guard tape, I'd still argue that there's going to be guys that are tackles that are moved to guard that are going to end up having better careers, right? In my opinion, that's going to end up happening. Josh Connerly, really disappointing. 33.5-inch arms. Again, you can play tackle, 6'4", 5'8". You can definitely put this guy at tackle, and I think he'll still be drafted in the first round as a tackle. But at some point, if he doesn't work out as a tackle, he'll be a guard, right? And again, I think that's kind of the case with most of these guys that are kind of coming out, right? But I think he'll still be a first-round pick as well. Definitely not as high on him as I was before. He did have a really, really good Senior Bowl, but he did struggle to anchor a little bit at the Senior Bowl. So I do think he's going to struggle to anchor in the NFL. And, you know, once that mental part happens where you can't anchor down properly, you're going to start to lose reps because you're going to start leaning a little bit. And, you know, it just, you know, kind of stacks and just gets worse and worse when you can't anchor in the NFL. So if he can't anchor, and keep in mind, Charles Grant, Anthony Belton, no issue with anchoring. If Josh Conerly cannot anchor, and not saying he wasn't able to, but he did have some struggles at the Senior Bowl. If he can't anchor at the Senior Bowl consistently, he might struggle in the NFL. So that's going to be something NFL teams will have to kind of decide. There's a couple other good offensive tackles. There's one guy here that I really like, Arianti Ursary. But I am hesitant with Ursary's movement. Again, it kind of comes back to, you know, you look at Charles Grant moving and then you look at Ursary moving. It's a big difference, right? And truth be told, even Ursary compared to Anthony Belton, they're about the same size. Belton moves a lot faster. He's a lot quicker. But Ursary did have a good Senior Bowl. Wouldn't be shocked if he goes in the first round, but I'm going to say he's going to end up dropping because of the movement. I think teams value that a lot, right? Dylan Fairchild's another really good offensive lineman. He'll be a guard. There's a lot of really, really good guards. There's one other guy that I want to kind of show you guys. It is a guy somewhere down here. Maybe he's not. Maybe it's not going to come up. But basically, here it is. So Holland Pierce, right? The last guy we'll talk about coming out of Rutgers. 6'8", 341, 36-inch arms. Phenomenal measurements. But we got to realize measurements don't translate to the NFL all the time. Now, arm length is important, right? If you're too low, that's going to most likely going to go into the NFL, or you'll kind of see that transition. If you're on the high end, right? If you got 36-inch arms, if you're 6'8", crazy, right? That doesn't always translate, right? And most of the time it does not translate, truth be told. Tape will translate more, right? 100% fact. I watched Holland Pierce's tape at Rutgers. He's not a good offensive tackle, right? And I just want to put that out there. He gets measured. People get so excited about it. I mean, look at the quote tweets. 47, a lot more likes, 41,000 views relative to all these other guys, right? The thing is, you know, Tate Ratledge, Jalen Rivers, Jonas Savannah out of Arizona, these guys are going to all be better than Holland Pierce. They'll all be drafted ahead of Pierce. Pierce, to me, is a developmental guy, good size. Will that translate? I don't know. He's not that good of a mover, in my opinion. But we'll see what ends up happening, man. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. The combine is ending today, and it's going to be interesting because we're a couple, 10, 11 days away from free agency. We're going to start to hear a lot more. Sam Darnold to the Raiders. We're going to hear that pretty much every single day at this point forward. And I didn't say this earlier, but I'll go ahead and say this as well. I talked about this in a previous video. You know, the Minnesota Vikings plan to franchise tag Sam Darnold and trade him. They're not going to let him walk. So the Raiders won't be able to bring him in via free agency. It's not happening, right? In fact, the Vikings actually, they went ahead and negotiated something with Byron Murphy, who was another tag potential, right? So the Vikings had two guys that they could have tagged. Byron Murphy, Sam Darnold. You can't tag two guys. You can only tag one. And they actually went ahead and renegotiated basically they pushed back a specific date with Byron Murphy. It was like a date where he officially becomes a free agent, and the Vikings at that point are going to lose a bunch of cash. And they renegotiated that day. And what that meant also was that they couldn't franchise tag Byron Murphy at that point. So the Vikings had decided, we're not going to franchise Byron Murphy. Instead, we'll push that date back, and then we'll negotiate the contract. We have like 2 weeks now to figure out that contract. And that's because they felt that we're going to franchise tag Sam Darnold, right? So the Vikings will franchise tag Sam Darnold based off that move. And they're not going to let him walk. They'll franchise him, and then they're going to look to trade him, right? So the Raiders will have to, at that point, give some sort of pickup. If they wanted like the 6th overall pick, I'm not doing that. Even if they wanted our 2nd round pick, I'm not doing that either, right? To me, those two picks are so valuable in this draft class. I'd give them one of our 3rd round picks if that's what they wanted. But I'm not giving them anything more than that, right? And if they wanted like a 2nd round pick, maybe next year 2nd round pick, I'd be more open to that, but not this year. We have the 6th pick in the 2nd round, 37th overall pick, or maybe that's the 5th pick actually. We have, I think, the 5th pick in the 2nd round, and it's important to realize that next year we might have the 59th pick in the 2nd round, right? There's a big difference between our pick this year and our pick next year. This year, we have a top 5 to 6 pick in the second round. Next year, it might be a bottom 5 to 6 in the second round. So I'd be more likely trading that pick away. So hope that makes sense. Let me know what you guys think. Would you guys trade for Sam Darnold? Is that something you guys would be interested in? What are your thoughts on some of the reports? Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, some of the measurements. Are there any sleeper offensive linemen that you guys like? Make sure you guys are subscribed, man, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.